The alarm cut through the bridge before I had even finished my coffee. 3 Corvath cruisers were closing on an unarmed council transport, and nobody was moving to help it. I watched the tactical display update in real time, red icons swarming a single defenseless blue dot, and I felt my stomach drop the way it always did right before everything went wrong. Grace Whitfield spoke first, her voice flat and fast. Distress signal confirmed. Council transport Illyra Bright, 312 civilians aboard. No weapons, no shields worth mentioning. Nearest council patrol is 40 minutes out. 40 minutes might as well have been 40 years. I looked at Daniel Cole, my tactical officer, and he was already looking back at me, waiting. We had run this exact scenario in simulations a dozen times. Nobody expected we would ever actually need it, because nobody expected the council would ever let a human ship get close enough to matter. Set an intercept course, I said. Full burn. Daniel's hands moved across the console before I finished the sentence. The reckoning shuddered as the engines came alive, and for a moment the whole ship groaned like an old building settling into a storm. 11 minutes to intercept, Daniel said. We will not make it before the Corvath reach weapons range. Then we make it anyway, I said. I want to explain something about the council before I tell you what happened next, because it matters. 6 months earlier, I stood in the gallery of the Grand Assembly and watched our own ambassador ask for help. Not weapons, not territory, just recognition, a voice at the table, a place to stand. The chamber laughed, an actual laugh, translated into 40 different alien throats, all aimed at us, like we were a joke that had wandered in off the street and started talking. A delegate from the Vex Assembly, all mandibles and clicking vowels, had asked what exactly Earth intended to do about anything. I had not answered him then. I did not need words. I needed time. Now the Corvath cruisers were closing on a transport full of people who had voted, every single one of them, against giving my planet so much as a seat near the door. And here we were, alone, 40 minutes short, and closing anyway. Daniel, weapon status, I said. Full spread ready. Range in 9 minutes. 9 minutes was still too long. I ran the numbers myself, watching the gap between the Corvath ships and the transport shrink second by second. They would reach firing range in 6 minutes. We would reach firing range in 9. That left a 3-minute window where the Illyra Bright would be alone with 3 warships that did not care whether it lived or died. Grace, open a channel to the transport, I said. Tell them to start evasive maneuvers now. Random vector changes. Nothing predictable. Buy us the 3 minutes. They are civilians, Grace said. They do not have a pilot trained for combat maneuvers. Then talk one through it, I said. You have 6 minutes. Grace did not argue again. She turned to her console and started talking, calm and clear, the way you talk to someone standing on a ledge. I heard fragments of it as I worked my own board. Turn to your left. Hold. Now drop altitude. Good. Now again. Somewhere on that transport, a scared civilian pilot was following the voice of a stranger from a planet the galaxy had spent decades pretending did not matter. 2 minutes to Corvath weapons range, Daniel said. I need more speed, I said. We are already redlining the engines, Daniel said. Anything more and we risk a core breach. Then we risk it, I said. Nobody on that bridge questioned me. That still gets to me sometimes, thinking back on it. Every one of them understood what I was asking, and every one of them let me ask it. Oliver Bates, down in engineering, must have heard the order relayed to him because the ship lurched again, harder this time, and somewhere below decks, I knew he was standing over a reactor core, doing something that violated at least 4 safety protocols. 1 minute, Daniel said. His voice had gone very quiet. On the display, the Corvath cruisers reached firing range of the transport. I watched 3 weapons icons light up red and felt something cold settle behind my ribs. They are firing, Daniel said. The transport pilot, guided by a voice they had never heard before that day, rolled the ship hard to port at the exact moment the Corvath opened fire. 2 shots missed clean. The third clipped the outer hull, and I watched the damage readout spike, but the ship held. We are in range, Daniel said. Orders. Take the lead cruiser's engines, I said. Disable, not destroy. I want to be honest about that order, because it surprised my own crew. Disable, not destroy. We had the firepower to end all 3 Corvath ships before they knew what hit them. I chose not to use it that way, Because I understood something the Council never had the patience to learn about us. Power that only knows how to kill is not power at all. It is just another kind of fear wearing a bigger gun. Daniel fired. The Reckoning's weapons found the lead cruiser's engine block with a precision that should not have been possible at that range, and the ship went dead in space, drifting, its weapons silent. The other two Corvath ships broke off. I do not know if it was surprise or fear that made them run, and honestly, I did not care which. I watched their engines flare as they turned away from the transport, away from us, back toward whatever hole they had crawled out of. "Grace, tell the transport they are clear," I said. She did, and I heard something in her voice I had not heard in a long time. Pride, maybe, or relief, possibly both. The Alira Bright drifted safely, its hull scorched but its people alive, 312 souls who had, 6 months earlier, been represented by a vote against us in the Grand Assembly. I doubt a single one of them knew that. I doubt it would have changed what we did. I sat back in my chair and let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding. That is when the second wave of Corvath ships dropped out of transit behind us. 5 of them, larger than the first 3, weapons already charged, and positioned exactly where our own transit lane back to friendly space used to be clear. Daniel's voice cracked just slightly. "Commander, this was not a random raid." "No," I said, watching the new contacts spread into an attack formation, with the kind of precision that raiders do not usually have. It was not. Somebody had baited us. Somebody had used a transport full of Council civilians as live cheese in a trap, and we had walked into it exactly the way they wanted, because walking away from 312 people was never something we were built to do. "Grace," I said, my voice steady even though nothing in my chest felt steady at all. "Signal the Council Fleet Command. Tell them we found their missing raiders. And oh, tell them," I added, "they are about to see exactly what happens when Earth stops asking for a seat at the table and starts making one." The 5 Corvath cruisers began their advance. I looked around my bridge one more time, at Daniel gripping his console with white knuckles, at Grace, already routing every scrap of power she could find into our shields, at the empty chair where our chief engineer would have sat, if he were not 3 decks below holding a reactor together, with nothing but stubbornness and duct tape. We did not choose this fight. We did not need to. It had been chosen for us the moment we decided that a laugh in a chamber full of strangers was not going to be the last word anyone ever heard from Earth. I keyed the ship-wide comm. "All hands. Brace for combat," I said. "And for what it is worth, I am glad it is you all with me today." The Reckoning turned to face 5 warships alone, 40 minutes from any help that was coming, and somewhere behind us, a Council transport full of people, who had never once thought about us, watched a single human ship decide that today was not the day anyone else was going to die on our watch. The first shots came fast, and the real fight had only just begun. The first Corvath volley hit our forward shields like a hammer on a bell, and the whole bridge rang with it. "Shields at 78%, Daniel called out. "They are targeting our engines." Of course they were. Cripple the engines, strand the ship, pick us apart at leisure. It was a smart plan, if you assumed you were fighting a crew that panicked under pressure. I had built my career on not being that crew. "Evasive pattern Delta," I said. "Daniel, return fire on the 2 lead ships. Grace, get me anything on their formation. Why 5 ships? Why now? Why here?" Grace's hands flew across her console. "Pulling sensor data," she said. "Give me a moment." A moment was a luxury we did not have much of. The Reckoning rolled hard to starboard, and I felt the deck tilt under my boots as Daniel threaded us through the gap between 2 incoming fire lines. Our return shots caught the nearest cruiser across its shield array, and I watched the readout flicker, weakening but not falling. "They are well-built ships," Daniel said, something like grudging respect in his voice. "Better than the raiders we cleared out of the perimeter last year." That was the thing nagging at the back of my mind too. Raiders did not usually fly in disciplined 5-ship formations. Raiders did not usually have the patience to bait a rescue with a defenseless transport, and then spring a second wave exactly on our most likely transit path home. This was not desperation. This was planning. "Grace, anything," I said. "I have their hull markings," Grace said. Cross-referencing now. "Commander, these are not registered Corvath military. They are also not registered pirates. There is no match in the Council database at all." That should not have been possible. The Council tracked every hull in known space, every registry, every flagged vessel, with an obsession that bordered on paranoia. 5 warships with no record anywhere meant one of two things. Either somebody had built them off the books, or somebody had gone to a great deal of trouble to erase them from every record that existed. Neither option made me feel better. "Incoming," Daniel said, and the ship rocked again, as another volley found its mark. "Shields at 52%. We cannot keep taking hits like this, and hold formation." I made a decision then, that I would spend the next several days defending in front of people who had never once fired a shot in anger. I ordered Daniel to stop playing defense. "Target the lead cruiser's shield generator," I said. "Full spread, everything we have." "Commander, that will drain nearly half our reserve power," Daniel said. "Then we make it count," I said. Daniel fired. Every weapon system on the Reckoning discharged at once, a coordinated barrage aimed at a single point on the lead cruiser's shield array. For a half-second nothing happened, and I felt my heart climb into my throat. Then the shield buckled, collapsed, and our follow-up shot tore straight through the exposed hull. The lead cruiser went dark, drifting, weapons silent, life support flickering on emergency power only, not destroyed. I had given that order once already that day, and I meant it the same way twice. Disabled. The remaining 4 ships broke formation, and for a moment, I thought we had won something. Then Grace's voice cut through the relief before it could fully land. "Commander, I am reading a new contact," she said. "Something large. Just came out of transit at the edge of the system. It is not responding to any hail." "How large?" I asked, though some part of me already did not want to know the answer. Grace looked up from her console, and for the first time since I had known her, I saw something close to fear on her face. "Larger than anything in the Council registry," she said. "Larger than anything I have ever seen." The new contact appeared on the main display, and the bridge went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with discipline. It was a ship, if you could call something that size a ship. It made the Reckoning look like a rowboat next to an ocean liner, and it made the 4 remaining Corvath cruisers look like children's toys scattered on the floor of a room some much larger presence had just walked into. "It is not moving to engage them," Daniel said slowly, watching the tactical display. "It is not moving to engage us either. It is just sitting there." "Grace, hail it," I said, though my voice came out quieter than I meant it to. "No response," Grace said after a moment. "But Commander, I am picking up something else. A transmission, encoded, being sent from the 4 Corvath cruisers toward that ship. They are reporting in." "Reporting in to what?" I asked, though nobody on that bridge had an answer for me yet. The 4 Corvath cruisers, which moments before had been trying to kill us, suddenly reversed course entirely, breaking off from both the Reckoning and their own disabled lead ship, and fled toward open space, at a speed that told me they were far more afraid of that new arrival than they had ever been of us. "Commander, the disabled cruiser is transmitting a distress beacon," Daniel said. "Should we move to intercept, take prisoners for questioning?" I looked at that vast, silent shape sitting motionless on our sensors, and something in my gut told me the answer to every question we had was not going to come from a handful of frightened Corvath sailors. "Belay that," I said. "Grace, get me everything you can on that ship before it decides to stop just sitting there." I want to tell you I felt calm in that moment, the way a good commander is supposed to feel, steady and certain in the face of the unknown. I did not. I felt exactly the way anyone would feel staring at something too large to make sense of, something that had appeared out of nowhere and made an entire raiding fleet run for their lives without firing a single shot. I felt small. I was not going to let my crew see that. "Daniel, keep us at full readiness," I said. "Whatever that thing wants, we are not going to be caught flat-footed when it decides to tell us." "Understood," Daniel said, though I could hear the same unease in his voice that I was fighting to keep out of my own. Grace worked in silence for a long minute, her console throwing strange readings across her screen that I did not fully understand, and, judging by her expression, neither did she. Finally she looked up. "Commander, I am not reading any weapon signatures from that ship," she said. "No active targeting systems. No engine spool up, nothing that suggests hostile intent. But the hull composition is not matching anything in our database either. It is not Corvath, it is not Vex, It is not anything the Council has on file. So we have no idea what it is, Daniel said. No, Grace said. We have no idea what it is. I sat in my chair and stared at that impossible shape on the display, motionless and silent, having just watched an entire raiding fleet flee from its presence without so much as a warning shot. Somewhere behind us, 312 civilians on a rescued transport were about to find out that the danger they had escaped was nothing compared to whatever had just arrived to watch us both. We had gone looking for raiders and found a trap. We had sprung the trap and found a second fleet. We had beaten the second fleet and found something that made all of it look small. I keyed the ship-wide comm again, my voice steadier than I felt. All hands, stand down from combat readiness, but remain at full alert, I said. We are not out of this yet. I have a feeling we are only just getting started. Grace, I said, turning back to her station. Send a full report back to Fleet Command. Everything we have seen today, the transport rescue, the second wave, the unregistered ships, and this new contact. Mark it priority 1. Already sending, she said. Daniel, I said, plot us a defensive holding position. We are not running, and we are not provoking. We wait, we watch, and we find out what we are actually dealing with before we make another move. Aye, Commander, Daniel said, and I heard something in his voice settle, some part of him finding solid ground and having an order to follow, even when none of us had solid ground to stand on ourselves. I looked one more time at that vast, silent shape on the display, sitting in the dark at the edge of the system like a question nobody in that entire fleet, human or otherwise, was ready to answer. Whatever it was, it had not come to fight us. I was fairly certain, though, that it had not come to fight the Korvath either. It had come to watch, and somewhere deep in my chest, underneath the adrenaline and the exhaustion of a battle that should never have needed fighting in the first place, I understood one thing with total clarity. Today was not going to be the last time we saw that ship. 3 hours passed before it moved. I had ordered rotating shifts so the crew could rest, though I doubted anyone actually slept. I certainly did not. I sat in my chair through most of it, watching that enormous shape sit motionless on the display, running through every scenario I could think of and finding none of them comforting. Commander, Grace said, breaking the long silence. It is moving. I was on my feet before she finished the sentence. Report. It is not approaching us, she said, relief evident even as she kept working. It is moving away, back toward the transit lane it arrived from. Whatever it wanted, it appears to have gotten it. Or it decided we were not worth the trouble, Daniel said quietly. I did not think that was it, though I kept the thought to myself. Something about the way it had simply appeared, watched a battle unfold, and departed without a single word, felt less like disinterest and more like a test. I had commanded soldiers long enough to recognize the shape of an evaluation, even from a source I could not begin to identify. Let it go, I said. We have our own priorities. Grace, status on the transport and the disabled cruiser. The Alira Bright is stable and requesting escort to the nearest council waypoint, Grace said. The disabled Korvath cruiser is transmitting an automated distress signal, but no life sign readings beyond the minimum crew required for automated systems. I believe it was left with a skeleton crew specifically to be captured. Bait within bait, Daniel muttered. That confirmed what I had already begun to suspect. Someone had planned this entire encounter in layers, each one designed to draw us deeper, and I did not yet know who or why, but I knew enough to understand it had not been random. Daniel, escort the transport to the waypoint, I said. Grace, keep that disabled cruiser under close watch, and prep a boarding team once we have backup. I want answers, not more mysteries. Understood, they both said, and the bridge settled back into the rhythm of routine work. The kind of routine that only exists in the aftermath of chaos, when everyone is moving fast because moving fast feels better than sitting still with what just happened. I stayed in my chair long after the immediate crisis had passed, staring at the empty stretch of space where that vast, silent ship had been, and I thought about the laughing chamber back home, the council delegates who had dismissed us as nothing worth taking seriously. They had no idea what had just watched their war unfold. Neither, if I was honest with myself, did I. But I intended to find out, and I had a feeling that whatever answer waited for us out there was going to change everything the galaxy thought it understood about who mattered and who did not. The reckoning turned toward the waypoint, escorting a transport full of survivors who owed their lives to a planet the Council had laughed out of the room 6 months earlier. And somewhere far behind us, a message was already traveling back to Fleet Command that would reach ears far beyond anyone I had expected. Word does not stay quiet in a galaxy this connected, not when 312 people had just watched a single human ship refuse to leave them behind, and not when an unidentified vessel, larger than anything on record, had chosen to watch it happen before vanishing into the dark without a word. I had no way of knowing it yet, sitting there in the quiet aftermath with my hands still faintly shaking from the adrenaline, but the report Grace had sent was already being read in rooms I had never set foot in, by people who were about to have a very difficult conversation about exactly how wrong they had been. Fleet Command recalled the reckoning 8 days later, and I knew before I even docked that this was not going to be a routine debrief. Ambassador Lucy Bennett met me at the airlock herself, which told me everything I needed to know about how seriously this had been taken. She was Earth's representative to the Council, a woman who had spent a decade absorbing insults with a diplomat's patience that I had never quite managed to develop myself, and she looked exhausted in a way I had never seen on her before. "They want you in the chamber within the hour," she said, walking beside me down the corridor without slowing her pace. "Not a private hearing. The full Council." I stopped walking. "The full Council does not convene for a border skirmish." "This is not about a border skirmish anymore," Lucy said, finally turning to face me. "Elena, 3 other systems reported unidentified contacts matching the description in your report within 48 hours of it being filed. Massive, unregistered, silent. Nobody knows what they are, and every single one of those systems is now demanding to know why a human ship encountered one first." I felt something cold settle in my chest, the same feeling I had standing on the bridge watching that vast shape sit motionless in the dark. "Demanding," I repeated. "That is an interesting word for it." Lucy's mouth tightened. "Some of them think you provoked it. Others think you have information you are withholding. A few, and I want you to hear this part clearly, are suggesting Earth staged the entire encounter to force our way into a larger role in Council affairs." I laughed, short and without humor. "We rescued 312 of their own civilians and disabled a warship doing it, and their response is to accuse us of orchestrating our own rescue mission." "That is the Council," Lucy said quietly. "That has always been the Council." We walked the rest of the way to the chamber in silence, and I used the time to steady myself the way I had learned to before every difficult engagement, breathing slow, cataloging what I knew, deciding what mattered enough to say out loud, and what did not. The Grand Assembly Chamber was exactly as I remembered it from 6 months earlier, a vast circular hall ringed with delegate stations rising in tiers toward a domed ceiling, every species represented by its own particular blend of posture and translated hostility. The last time I had stood in that gallery, they had laughed at us. This time, as I walked to the central floor with Lucy at my side, the chamber was silent, and somehow that silence felt worse. "Commander Elena Marsh," the Council chair announced. Her name was Ambassador Orun, a tall figure from a species I had never learned to read well, all sharp angles and careful stillness. "You will provide a full account of the events in the outer Korvath sector." I gave it. Every detail, the distress call, the rescue, the second wave, the disabled cruiser, the arrival and departure of the unidentified vessel. I kept my voice level and my account precise, the way I would deliver a briefing to my own command, refusing to let the chamber's silence rattle me the way its laughter once had. When I finished, the questions came fast, and not all of them were questions in good faith. A delegate from the Ashen Assembly, seated high in the tiers, spoke first. "You destroyed a Korvath cruiser without provocation," he said. "This sounds a great deal like an act of war." "I disabled a cruiser that was actively engaging a defenseless civilian transport," I said. "If that is an act of war by your definition, I would ask what word you use for standing by and letting 300 people die because intervening was not cost-effective." A murmur went through the chamber, and Ambassador Orun raised a hand for order before it could grow into something louder. The Vex delegate spoke next, the same one, I realized with something like grim satisfaction, who had asked 6 months earlier what exactly Earth intended to do about anything. Trellick, his name was, and his mandibles clicked in a rhythm I had come to associate with contempt. You claim this unidentified vessel simply watched and departed, he said. Convenient. That the only witnesses to this supposed encounter are human. I felt Lucy tense beside me before I could respond myself. Sensor logs from the reckoning have already been submitted to Council archives, Lucy said, her voice cutting cleanly through the chamber. They are available for independent verification by any delegate who wishes to review them. I would remind the chamber that 3 other systems have now reported similar contacts, entirely independent of anything human. Are you suggesting we orchestrated those as well? Trellick did not answer that. Another delegate, this one from a smaller assembly I did not recognize, asked the question that I suspected had been sitting underneath every other question in that chamber since I walked in. If this vessel is as significant as your report suggests, why did it choose to reveal itself during a human engagement, rather than during any of the 100 conflicts this council has managed over the past decade? I let that question sit in the air for a moment before I answered it, because I wanted every delegate in that chamber to hear my answer clearly. I do not know why it chose that moment, I said, but I have a theory, and you are welcome to disagree with it. I think it was not interested in the Korvath raiders at all. I think it was interested in seeing what a species does when it has every reason to walk away and chooses not to. The chamber went quiet again, differently this time. Ambassador Orun studied me for a long moment before speaking. That is a bold interpretation, Commander. It is the only one that makes sense to me, I said. You have all watched us for decades. You have seen every plea we have made and voted against most of them. You laughed at us in this very chamber 6 months ago. And yet the one time something that large and that unknown chooses to show itself, it is watching a human crew refuse to leave strangers to die. Draw your own conclusions. I have already drawn mine. I did not expect applause, and I did not get any. What I got instead was something I had not expected at all. A long, uncomfortable silence, in which I watched several delegates who had laughed loudest 6 months earlier, suddenly find something very interesting to look at on their own consoles. Ambassador Orun finally spoke again, her tone measured in a way that told me she was choosing her words with unusual care. This council will convene an emergency session to determine a unified response to these contacts, she said. Commander Marsh, your fleet will be expected to share full sensor data and cooperate with any joint investigation the council authorizes. We will cooperate with any investigation conducted in good faith, I said. I will not have my crew treated as suspects for the crime of doing what this chamber has spent decades claiming to value, and never actually rewarding. I saw Lucy's jaw tighten beside me, the diplomat in her bracing for the fallout of a line she would never have chosen to deliver herself, but she did not contradict me, and for that I was grateful. Ambassador Orun held my gaze for a long moment, and something passed across her expression that I could not quite name. This session is adjourned, she finally said. Commander Marsh, Ambassador Bennett, you are dismissed. We were 3 steps toward the exit when Trellick's voice rose again behind us, sharp and deliberately loud enough to carry across the emptying chamber. Do not mistake one rescue for relevance, Commander, he said. Earth remains what it has always been in this council, a voice without a vote. I stopped walking. I felt Lucy's hand touch my arm, a silent warning, and I understood it, but I turned around anyway. A voice without a vote saved your transport 8 days ago, I said. A voice without a vote disabled a warship that your own fleet command was 40 minutes too slow to reach. I am not asking this chamber to give us a vote out of kindness. I am telling you that the day is coming when you will need one, and I suggest you spend the time between now and then deciding whether you want us as an ally by choice or a necessity by circumstance. Trellick had no response to that, and I did not wait around to see if he found one. Lucy did not speak again until we were well clear of the chamber, walking fast down a corridor lined with delegate offices that fell quiet as we passed, every eye following us the way they never had before. That was reckless, she finally said, though there was no real anger in her voice. Maybe, I said, but I meant every word of it. I know you did, Lucy said. That is what worries me. We reached the transport bay in silence, and I was almost through the door when she spoke again, quieter this time. Elena, she said, whatever that ship was, whatever it wanted, I think you were right about one thing. It was not interested in the Korvath. I know, I said. Do you know what it was interested in? She asked. I looked back at her, at the chamber doors closing behind us, at a council that had spent decades treating my planet as background noise, and had just spent an hour failing to hide how badly that assumption had cracked. "I have a guess," I said. "I think it wanted to know what we would do when nobody was watching and nothing was forcing our hand." "And what did we do?" Lucy asked, though I suspected she already knew the answer. "We did the only thing we know how to do," I said. "We showed up anyway." Lucy did not say anything else, but she did not need to. We walked back to the ship together, and behind us, in a chamber that had spent decades laughing at the idea that Earth might ever matter, a very different kind of conversation was just beginning, one that would not stop at a single emergency session, and one that neither of us yet understood was only the opening move in something far larger than either the Korvath raiders or the strange silent ship that had watched us survive them. 3 days later, the second contact happened, and this time, nobody was laughing at all. The call came in at what should have been the quietest hour of the night shift, and quiet hours on the reckoning had a way of turning into the worst hours without any warning at all. "Commander, you need to see this," Grace said, and something in her voice pulled me out of my quarters before I had even finished putting my boots on. I reached the bridge to find the main display filled with contacts, dozens of them, spread across 3 different systems simultaneously, all matching the same profile as the vessel we had encountered 8 days earlier. Not one silent watcher this time. An entire fleet, arriving all at once, at every major council waypoint along the outer sectors. "Report," I said, dropping into my chair. Grace did not look up from her console. "Simultaneous arrivals at Perimeter Station, the Korvath Home System, and the Vex Trade Corridor," she said. "All 3 locations are now reporting the same thing. Massive unidentified vessels, no hostile action yet, no response to hails, just holding position." "Holding position where?" I asked. "Directly above every major population center in each system," Daniel said, and I heard something in his voice that I recognized because I felt it too, a kind of controlled dread that comes from understanding a threat before you fully understand its shape. "Fleet Command wide channel is already flooding," Grace said. "Every system in range is requesting immediate council intervention. Nobody knows what these ships want. Nobody knows if they are hostile." I stood up and walked to the display, studying the pattern of the arrivals. 3 systems, simultaneous, positioned over civilian centers rather than military installations. That was not a raid formation. That was something else entirely, something closer to a demonstration. "Grace, pull up everything the council has gathered since our first encounter," I said. "I want to know if anyone has made contact, any communication at all." "One moment," Grace said, her hands moving fast. "Commander, there is something. 20 minutes ago, the vessel above the Vex Trade Corridor broadcast a single transmission. It was not translated by any council system. Nobody understands the language." "Send it to my station," I said. The transmission played through my console, a low, resonant tone that did not sound like any language I had ever heard, more like the sound a very large object makes when it moves through water, and underneath it, faint and almost buried, something that might have been words in a structure I could not begin to parse. "I do not know what that means," I admitted, "but I do not think it was meant as a threat. I think it was meant as an announcement." "An announcement of what?" Daniel asked. Before I could answer, Grace's console lit up with a priority alert that made her sit up straighter than I had ever seen her sit. "Commander," she said, "Fleet Command is transmitting an emergency directive from the Council. All available human vessels are being requested to report to the Vex Trade Corridor immediately." "Requested by whom?" I asked, already knowing the answer would matter more than the request itself. "Ambassador Orun, personally," Grace said, "and Commander, the message specifically names you and the Reckoning." I felt the weight of that settle over the bridge, heavier than any weapons fire we had taken 8 days earlier. A council that had spent decades treating my planet as an afterthought was now asking for us by name, in the middle of a crisis nobody understood, because apparently, the one thing they had learned from watching us was that we did not run. "Daniel, set a course for the Vex Trade Corridor," I said. "Full burn, no delays." "Aye, Commander," he said, and the ship came alive around us with the kind of urgency that no drill had ever quite managed to replicate. We arrived 6 hours later, to a site that I do not think I will ever fully describe the right way, no matter how many times I try. The vessel hanging above the Vex trade corridor was larger than anything I had seen in my life. Larger even than the one we had encountered before, its hull catching the light of the system's star in patterns that seemed to shift and reform as I watched, like something that had not quite decided what shape it wanted to be. Beneath it, the Vex homeworld's orbital stations sat frozen, every ship in the sector holding position, weapons powered down on Council orders, waiting. "Commander Marsh!" A voice came over the comm the moment we dropped out of transit, and I recognized it as Ambassador O'Roon herself, which told me exactly how seriously this had escalated. "Report to the flagship immediately. We require your input." "My input," I repeated, glancing at Daniel, who looked as confused as I felt. "They think you understand something the rest of us do not." Lucy's voice cut in over a second channel, and I realized she must have been aboard the Council flagship already. "Elena, they are terrified, and they do not know what to do with that feeling. You are the only commander in this entire fleet who has faced something like this before and come out the other side." I did not feel like someone who understood anything in that moment, staring at a vessel the size of a small moon, holding silent position above a world full of people who had spent decades pretending my species did not matter. But I understood enough to know that fear does not wait for you to feel ready before it demands an answer. "Take us in," I told Daniel. "Grace, keep monitoring that transmission. If it changes at all, I want to know immediately." We docked with the Council flagship 20 minutes later, and I walked into a command deck full of delegates who, 6 months earlier, had laughed me out of a chamber, now standing in near total silence, watching a display that none of them had any framework to understand. Ambassador O'Roon met me at the entrance, and for the first time since I had known of her, she looked genuinely uncertain. "Commander," she said, "thank you for coming." I did not respond to the gratitude, because I did not entirely trust it yet. "What do you need from me?" I asked instead. "You have faced one of these vessels before and survived," she said. "Every strategist on this deck has a different theory about what they want, and none of us can agree on anything except that we do not want to be the ones who guess wrong." I studied the display for a long moment before I spoke. "When we encountered the first one, it did not attack," I said. "It watched. It watched us choose to save people who owed us nothing, and then it left. I do not think these ships are here to conquer anything. I think they are here to judge something." "Judge what?" Trellick's voice came from somewhere behind O'Roon, and I noted, with some satisfaction I was not proud of, that he sounded far less confident than he had in the chamber 8 days earlier. I turned to look at him directly. "I think they are here to judge whether this council, and everyone in it, is capable of doing what my crew did without being forced to," I said. "I think they want to know if any of you would have done the same thing for us, if the situation had been reversed." Nobody on that command deck had an answer for that, and the silence stretched long enough that I began to wonder if anyone ever would. Then the vessel above us moved. Every alarm on the flagship went off at once, and I watched the massive shape begin to descend, slow and deliberate, toward the orbital stations below. And for one terrible moment, I believed I had been wrong about everything, that this had never been a test at all, that we were about to watch an entire population center destroyed, while every fleet in range stood frozen with indecision. "Hold fire," I shouted, before anyone else could give a different order, because I understood something in that instant that I could not fully explain even to myself. If this really was a test, firing on it now would be the answer that failed it. Ambassador O'Roon looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I watched a council leader choose to trust a human commander over her own instincts. "Hold fire," she repeated, and the order rippled out across every ship in the sector. The vessel descended until it hung just above the closest orbital station, close enough that I could see, on our sensors, some kind of energy field extending from its hull, wrapping around the station like a hand cupping something fragile. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The energy field held for exactly 30 seconds, and in that time I do not think a single person on that command deck breathed. Then it withdrew, and the vessel rose back to its original position, silent, motionless, exactly as it had been before. Grace's voice came through my earpiece, shaking slightly. "Commander, the orbital station just reported something. Their entire life support and structural fail-safe systems that were failing due to age and neglect, systems that were 3 months from catastrophic failure according to their own maintenance logs, have just been fully repaired. I felt something loosen in my chest that I had not realized was clenched tight since the moment that vessel began its descent. It was not attacking, I said, mostly to myself, though the whole command deck heard it. It was helping. Ambassador Orun turned to me slowly. How could you have known that? I did not know it, I admitted. I believed it, because I have spent my entire career watching what happens when the loudest voice in the room assumes the worst about someone before giving them a chance to prove otherwise. I decided not to make that same mistake twice in one day. Nobody in that command deck spoke for a long moment, and I let the silence sit, because some lessons land better without anyone filling the space around them with more words. Then, from across the room, a translator crackled to life, carrying a transmission we had not heard before, one that had apparently been broadcasting from all three vessels simultaneously the entire time, only now resolving into something the Council's systems could finally parse. The message was short, and I have heard it repeated so many times since that day that I could recite it without thinking, but I still remember exactly how it felt the first time it filled that silent command deck. We have watched this quadrant for longer than your histories record, the voice said, resonant and strange and entirely without malice. We do not intervene in the affairs of the young. We only watch, and we remember, and when a choice reveals something true about a species, we take note of it. The transmission paused, and I felt every eye on that command deck slide toward me, though I had done nothing but stand there and listen. One crew, among all the fleets we have observed across this quadrant, chose to risk everything for strangers who had given them nothing in return, the voice continued. We came to see if that choice would be honored, or dismissed as an accident, by those who claim to speak for this quadrant's future. Ambassador Orun did not look at me this time. She looked at the delegates surrounding her, at Trellick, at every representative who had spent decades treating Earth's pleas as background noise, and I watched something shift in her expression that I recognized because I had felt it myself, 8 days earlier, staring at a vessel too large to understand. It was the exact moment an entire council realized that the joke they had been laughing at for years had just been sitting quietly in the room the whole time, waiting for someone to notice it was not laughing back. The transmission ended, and the vessels held their positions, silent once more, and I understood, standing in that command deck full of people who did not yet know what to do with what they had just witnessed, that everything about how this galaxy saw my planet had just changed, whether the Council was ready for that change or not. Somebody did not want that vote to happen, and I found that out the hard way, 6 days before the chamber ever reconvened. We had returned to a quiet stretch of space near the perimeter to resupply, the closest thing to rest my crew had gotten since the Alira Bright rescue, and I was in the mess hall listening to Oliver Bates complain about the reactor modifications he had been forced to make on the fly, when Grace's voice came through the ship-wide comm, tight and urgent, in a way that emptied the room before she finished her sentence. "Commander, bridge, now," she said. I do not remember the walk there. I remember arriving to find Daniel already at his station, weapons systems spinning up without waiting for my order, and the main display filled with contacts closing in from 3 separate vectors, small, fast, and clearly built for exactly one purpose. "Report," I said. 6 unregistered strike craft, Daniel said. "No transponders, no hails answered, and Commander, their approach vectors are not random. They came out of transit already knowing our position." "Somebody sold us out," I said, and I did not need anyone to confirm it, because there was no other way 6 ships found an unlisted resupply position without inside information. "Grace." "Who?" I said. "I am working on it," Grace said, her hands moving fast. "But Commander, that is not the priority right now. Their vectors are not converging on us. They are converging on the resupply station." I looked at the display again and understood immediately what she meant. The station behind us was a small logistics outpost, barely defended, home to maybe 40 civilian workers and a skeleton crew of engineers, keeping the fuel processors running. It had no strategic value to anyone, except as a place to refuel quietly, unless someone wanted it destroyed specifically because we were docked there. "Daniel, get us between those ships and the station," I said. "Grace, warn the station to begin emergency evacuation to their shelter decks, immediately." "Already sending," Grace said. The reckoning peeled away from the docking clamps with a shudder that rattled every loose object on the bridge, and I felt the ship respond the way it always did, when the stakes stopped being theoretical, fast, urgent, alive. "They are altering course," Daniel said. "Confirmed, Commander. They are now targeting us directly." "Good," I said, because a small, cold part of me had hoped for exactly that. "Draw them off the station. Keep them focused on us." The first strike craft opened fire before I finished giving the order, and the reckoning rocked hard under a barrage that hit differently than the Corvath assault weeks earlier. Faster, more precise, weapons fire that found gaps in our shield rotation, with a consistency that told me whoever built these ships had studied our combat data closely. "They know our shield patterns," Daniel said, urgency climbing in his voice. "Commander, this is not a random raid. They have been studying the encounter reports." That confirmed the leak Grace had already suspected, and it told me something worse besides, that whoever wanted this vote stopped had access to classified council sensor logs, which meant this was not some independent faction acting alone. This had support from somewhere inside the very institution that had just started, for the first time, to take us seriously. "Randomize evasive pattern," I said. "Do not give them a second chance to read us." Daniel complied, and the ship twisted through a series of maneuvers that had no fixed rhythm, and I watched two of the strike craft's shots go wide as a result, but the third found its mark, and the whole bridge lurched violently as an alarm klaxon joined the chaos. "Hull breach, deck 4, Grace called out, over the noise. "Emergency bulkheads sealing now." "Casualties?" I asked, and I hated how steady my own voice sounded even as my chest tightened waiting for the answer. "2 crew reported injured. None critical. Emergency teams responding," Grace said, and I let myself breathe again, just barely. "I want those ships disabled, not destroyed, if we can manage it," I said, though even as I said it I understood the odds of managing that kind of restraint in the middle of 6 ships firing on us at once were slim. Daniel fired back, our weapons finding the nearest strike craft's engine housing with the same precision that had disabled the Corvath cruiser weeks before, and the small ship spun away, dead in space. But the other 5 closed the gap instead of retreating, more disciplined than raiders had any business being. "Commander, I have something," Grace said, cutting through the tactical chatter. "I traced part of their communications relay. It is routing through a private channel, registered to an aide in the Ashen Assembly delegation." "An aide," I repeated, "not a delegate." "An aide with access to council sensor archives," Grace said. "Someone senior enough to grant that access had to authorize it." I did not have time to sit with the implications of that, because 2 more strike craft broke off from the main group and moved to flank us, and I understood immediately what they were attempting, boxing us in while the remaining 3 kept our forward shields under constant pressure. "Daniel, hard to port, now," I said, and the reckoning banked sharply, cutting inside the flanking maneuver before it could close, and our return fire caught a second strike craft across its main thruster array, sending it tumbling out of formation. "4 left," Daniel said, shields at 61% and falling. The remaining ships regrouped fast, clearly working from a coordinated plan rather than raw aggression, and I understood we were not simply outgunning frightened mercenaries. We were fighting people who had been trained, briefed, and paid well enough to keep pressing, even after losing a third of their formation. "Grace, get that evidence packaged and transmitted to Ambassador Bennett directly, encrypted," I said. "If something happens to this ship, I want that leak exposed regardless." "Sending now," Grace said, though her voice had gone tight enough that I understood she was thinking the same thing I was, that something happening to this ship was no longer a hypothetical worth dismissing. The remaining 4 strike craft split into 2 pairs and came at us from opposite angles, and for the first time since the fight began, I felt the ship's response lag behind Daniel's inputs by a fraction of a second, the accumulated damage finally catching up with us. "Shields at 40%, Daniel said. "Commander, I do not think we can take a sustained hit from all 4 at once." "Then we do not let them land one," I said, though I had no clean way to guarantee that. Only the same stubborn refusal that had gotten us this far in the first place. I want to be honest about the next few minutes, because they were the closest this crew ever came to losing everything, and I do not think any account of what happened afterward means anything if I pretend otherwise. Daniel threaded the ship through a gauntlet of crossfire with a precision that should not have been possible for a human pilot working purely on instinct and exhaustion, and twice, I watched shots clip our hull close enough that the deck plating groaned beneath my boots. And once, for just a moment, every light on the bridge flickered as Oliver rerouted power from somewhere I did not fully understand to keep the shields from collapsing entirely. "We are not going to win this by outlasting them," Daniel said, breathing hard now, sweat visible along his hairline despite the climate-controlled bridge. "We need something else." I looked at the display, at the 2 remaining pairs of strike craft repositioning for another coordinated pass, and an idea formed that I did not love, but could not find a better alternative to in the time we had left. "Grace, overload the forward deflector array on my mark, then reroute everything we have left into a single directional pulse," I said. "It will drop our shields completely for 11 seconds, but it should scramble every targeting system within close range." "That is extremely risky," Grace said, already moving to comply anyway, because she trusted me even when the plan sounded like exactly the kind of thing that got people killed. "Everything about today has been risky," I said. "Daniel, get us in close on my mark, closer than they will expect." "Understood," Daniel said, and I watched his hands steady despite everything, because that was the kind of officer he was, the kind who found calm precisely when the moment demanded it most. The 4 strike craft began their final approach, and I waited, counting the seconds in my head, watching the gap close, until it felt like the exact edge of too late. "Now," I said. Grace triggered the overload, and every light on the bridge died at once, as the ship's power surged forward into a single blinding pulse that washed out every sensor within 100 kilometers, our own included. For 11 seconds we were flying blind, defenseless, closer to those 4 strike craft than any tactical manual would ever recommend, and I do not think I have ever felt 11 seconds last so long in my entire life. When the sensors came back online, 3 of the 4 strike craft were tumbling, their systems fried by the pulse, weapons dark, engines dead. The 4th had been far enough back to avoid the worst of it, and its pilot, apparently deciding that 4-to-1 odds against a ship willing to blind itself at close range were no longer odds worth keeping, broke off and fled toward open space, at a speed that told me exactly how much confidence they had left. The bridge stayed silent for a long moment after that, nobody quite ready to believe it had worked. "Status," I finally said, my own voice sounding rougher than I expected. "Shields at 12%. Hull integrity holding. No further hostile contacts," Daniel reported, and I heard the exhaustion in every word. "Casualties?" I asked again. "The 2 injured crew from earlier are stable," Grace said. "No new casualties, Commander." I let myself sit back in my chair for the first time since the fight had begun, and I looked around at my crew, at Daniel's hands still faintly trembling on the console, at Grace already pulling together the full report she would need to send to Fleet Command and to Lucy both, and I understood that whatever this had cost us, it had cost the people who sent those ships far more, because now we had proof, not just of an attack, but of exactly who had authorized the intelligence that made it possible. "Grace, finish that transmission to Ambassador Bennett," I said. "Everything we have. I want the Council to know exactly what lengths someone was willing to go to in order to keep that vote from happening." "Already sent," Grace said. "Commander, she is requesting to speak with you directly, immediately." "Put her through," I said. Lucy's voice came through, urgent and sharp in a way I had rarely heard from her. "Elena, are you and your crew intact?" "We are," I said. "Banged up, but intact. And Lucy, we have everything we need to expose whoever tried to stop this before it started." "I know," she said. "I have already begun working on it. Elena, I need you to understand something. This changes the vote. This does not weaken it. If anything, it just proved every word you said in that chamber 9 days ago." I looked at the display, at the drifting wrecks of 3 disabled strike craft, and the empty space where a 4th had fled, and at the quiet outpost behind us, still intact, still full of 40 civilian workers who would never know how close they had come to being collateral damage in someone else's attempt to keep a single planet out of a vote. "Then let us make sure it does exactly that," I said. 6 days later, carrying not just a plea for a voting seat but fresh, undeniable proof of exactly how far some corners of that council would go to keep it from happening, the Grand Assembly convened again, and this time I did not walk into that chamber expecting laughter. I still remember the way the doors opened differently that day, wider somehow, though I know that was only in my head. Lucy walked beside me the way she always did, but her posture had changed, straighter, less braced for impact, and I understood without asking that something fundamental had shifted in how this council intended to treat the conversation we were about to have. Ambassador Orun called the session to order, and the chamber fell silent faster than I had ever seen it fall silent before. "We have spent the last 9 days reviewing the events at the Vex Trade Corridor," she began, "and every scrap of data available regarding the vessels that visited 3 of our systems simultaneously. I will not pretend this council understands everything about what we witnessed, but we understand enough to know that we owe a debt of honesty to this chamber, and to the delegation we have spent years dismissing without cause." I felt Lucy's hand brush mine, just briefly, and I understood it as the closest thing to a celebration she was willing to allow herself in that room. Trellick rose from his seat, and for a moment, I braced myself for another round of the same contempt I had grown almost used to. Instead, he stood in silence for a long moment, his mandibles clicking slowly, before he spoke. "I have served on this council for 31 years, he said. "In that time, I have voted against every proposal Earth's delegation has brought before this chamber. I told myself it was caution. I told myself it was prudence. I understand now that it was something smaller than either of those words, and less honorable." He turned to look at me directly, and I did not look away. "I asked you, in this very chamber, what exactly Earth intended to do about anything," he said. "I have thought of little else, since that vessel spoke of a crew who chose to risk everything for strangers. I believe I already had my answer that day. I simply refused to hear it." I did not respond right away, because I was not entirely sure my voice would hold steady if I tried. Lucy answered for both of us, her tone measured and calm in the way only years of diplomatic training could produce. "Apologies are not policy, Ambassador," she said. "We did not come here today for an apology. We came here because a species this council has never encountered before just demonstrated, in front of every delegate in this chamber, that the values this council claims to uphold are worth less than the effort it takes to actually practice them." A murmur ran through the tiers, but it was not the dismissive murmur I remembered from 6 months earlier. It sounded, for the first time in my experience of that chamber, like something closer to agreement. Ambassador Orun raised a hand for order, though this time it was barely necessary. "This council will formally extend Earth a full voting seat in the Grand Assembly, effective immediately," she said. "Not as a reward for a single act of courage, though that act will not be forgotten. As a correction of an error this body should have corrected years ago." I heard Lucy exhale beside me, slow and controlled, the sound of a decade of frustration finally finding somewhere to go. "There is more," Ambassador Orun continued, and something in her tone made the chamber lean in. "The vessels that visited our systems have not departed. They remain at the edges of council space, silent, watching. We do not know what they intend next, or how long their patience will last. What we do know is that they responded to one thing above all else in the events of these past weeks, and that was a willingness to act with courage when no one required it." She looked at me then, and I understood what was coming before she said it. "Commander Marsh, the Council formally requests that Earth take a leading role in any future contact and coordination efforts regarding these vessels," she said. "Not because we believe you hold answers the rest of us lack, because you have already proven, in circumstances none of us chose to prepare for, that you are the kind of leader this quadrant needs when the stakes are the highest." I stood in the center of that chamber, the same chamber that had laughed me and my ambassador out the door less than a year earlier, and I thought about every plea Earth had made over the decades that had been dismissed without a second thought, every disaster we had been left to face alone because helping us was never considered worth the cost. I thought about the Alira Bright, and 312 people who would never know how close they had come to being a footnote in someone else's war. I thought about a vessel larger than anything I had ever seen, choosing to descend not in judgment but in quiet, patient repair, because somewhere in whatever vast intelligence guided it, a single choice by a single crew had mattered enough to notice. "We accept the responsibility," I said, and my voice did not shake at all. "But I want this chamber to understand something before we move forward. We did not do what we did 9 days ago because we wanted a seat at this table. We did it because it was right, and we would have done it whether anyone was watching or not. I would ask this council to remember that difference, The next time a species without power or influence asks you for help, the measure of what you are worth was never in what you can offer in return. It was always in what you are willing to give when nothing is offered back. Nobody in that chamber laughed. Nobody dismissed it. For the first time since I had set foot in that room, I watched an entire council sit with the weight of something true and let it settle without flinching away from it. The session adjourned not long after, and Lucy and I walked out together into a corridor that felt different than it had 9 days earlier. Delegates nodding as we passed rather than looking away, a few even stopping to offer words I never expected to hear from people who had spent years pretending my planet did not exist. We reached the transport bay in comfortable silence this time, no tension between us, just the quiet exhaustion of two people who had spent months fighting a battle that had nothing to do with weapons and everything to do with being taken seriously. "You did well in there," Lucy said finally. "I did not do anything different than I have always done," I said. "The council just finally decided to listen." Lucy smiled, small and tired and genuine. "Sometimes that is the whole battle," she said. I returned to the reckoning that evening to find my crew waiting on the bridge, not because duty required it, but because word of the council's decision had already spread faster than any official channel could manage. Daniel stood at his station, with something I had never quite seen on his face before, a kind of quiet vindication. Grace looked up from her console with an expression that told me she had already heard everything, and was simply waiting to hear it confirmed from me directly. I gave them the full account, and when I finished, the bridge was quiet for a long moment before Daniel spoke. "So what happens now?" he asked. "Do we go looking for that vessel? Try to make contact properly?" "I do not think we need to go looking," I said, glancing at the main display, where a new contact had just appeared at the edge of our sensor range, silent and massive and entirely familiar. "I think it already knows exactly where to find us." Grace's console chimed with an incoming transmission, and this time, unlike every previous encounter, it came through fully translated, calm, and clear. "We will not intervene further," the voice said. "This quadrant's future belongs to those who inhabit it. But know that we will continue to watch, and that what we have seen from your crew has changed how we regard this quadrant's potential. There may come a day when that regard matters more than either of us yet understands." The transmission ended, and the vessel did not move closer, simply held its distant position, a silent witness once more. I sat back in my chair and looked around at my crew, at Daniel and Grace and every officer who had stood beside me through a battle none of us had chosen, and a political fight that had mattered just as much, and I felt something settle in my chest that I had not felt in a very long time. Not triumph exactly. Something steadier than that. Something closer to belonging. "We are not done," I told them, because I believed it completely. "This is not the end of anything. It is the first time this galaxy has actually looked at us and seen what we are, instead of what they assumed we were. That is not a finish line. That is a beginning." Grace's console chimed again. A new message this time. Not from the vessel at the edge of our sensors, but from Fleet Command. A routine request from a smaller species near the outer reaches, one Earth had never had contact with before, addressed not to the Council, but directly to us. I read it twice before I looked up. "They are asking for help," I said, directly, not through the Council, just us. Daniel looked at me, waiting, the same way he always waited before a decision that mattered. I did not hesitate. "Set a course," I said. "Let us go find out who we are going to be next." The reckoning turned away from the silent vessel still holding its distant watch, and out toward a galaxy that, for the first time in living memory, had finally learned to stop laughing and start paying attention. The journey to the outer reaches took the better part of a week, long enough that I found myself standing at the observation port more nights than I care to admit, watching unfamiliar stars slide past and thinking about how strange it was that a single choice, made without any expectation of reward, had rewritten the shape of an entire quadrant's assumptions about who deserved a voice. The species that had sent the request called themselves the Mirren, a small, quiet civilization tucked along a trade route the Council had never bothered to formally survey, and their message, when Grace finally translated it in full, was almost painfully modest. They were not asking for weapons or territory. They were asking for someone to look at a failing water purification system on their primary world before an entire coastal population ran out of clean water within the season. It was not glamorous. It was not the kind of mission that would make headlines back in the Grand Assembly. It was exactly the kind of request the Council had ignored for decades because it offered nothing in return. And that, more than anything, was why I wanted to be the one who answered it. Oliver Bates met me in the corridor outside engineering the day before we arrived, wiping grease from his hands with a rag that had long since stopped being useful for that purpose. "I pulled the specs on their purification system," he said. "It is old technology, older than anything we use, but it is fixable. I can have a portable unit built and calibrated before we even reach orbit." "That is good news," I said. Oliver hesitated, the rag still in his hands, and I recognized the look on his face as one he got right before he said something he had been turning over for a while. "Can I ask you something, Commander?" he said. "Go ahead." "Why this one?" he asked. "We could have taken any assignment after the vote. Every system in Council space wants to be the first to work with us officially now. Why pick the quiet planet nobody has heard of, fixing water pipes instead of standing next to Ambassador Orun at some ceremony?" I thought about that question longer than it probably deserved, because it mattered to me that I answer it honestly rather than quickly. "Because ceremonies are for people who already believe we matter," I said. "This is for people who do not yet know we exist. If we only show up where the cameras are, we become exactly the kind of ally the Council always was to us, present when it is convenient and absent when it is not. I would rather be the opposite of that, even if nobody ever writes it down." Oliver nodded slowly, and I watched something settle in his expression, the particular satisfaction of a man who had just gotten confirmation that the ship he served on was exactly the kind of ship he had hoped it was. "Fair enough, Commander," he said, and went back to his work with something lighter in his step than before. We arrived at the Mirren homeworld 2 days later, to find a planet unlike anything Council records had prepared us for. Vast oceans broken by narrow chains of floating settlements, structures built to move with the tides rather than resist them, an entire civilization that had learned to live in partnership with an environment most species would have simply engineered into submission. Grace hailed the surface, and the response that came back was hesitant, almost disbelieving, as though they had sent their request into the void without any real expectation that a reply would ever come, let alone this quickly. We were greeted at the primary settlement by a Mirren elder named Senate, small and pale-skinned with wide, dark eyes clearly adapted for the low light beneath their ocean's surface. And the first thing she said to me, once the translators had settled into a working rhythm, was not a request for help at all. "We did not believe you would come," she said. "Our request was filed through the standard Council channels 11 months ago. We assumed, as we always had, that it would sit unanswered until the situation resolved itself, one way or another." 11 months, I repeated, feeling something tighten in my chest that had nothing to do with the mission ahead of us, and everything to do with exactly how many voices like this one had spent years shouting into a silence that never answered. "We are used to it," Senate said, without bitterness, which somehow made it worse. "The Council has larger concerns than a small water system on a small world." I looked past her, at children playing along the edges of the floating settlement, at families going about ordinary lives on a planet that had been quietly waiting nearly a year for help that nobody expected to come, and I understood, more clearly than I had in any council chamber, exactly what all of this had been for. "You are not small to us," I said, "and you are not going to wait 11 months for anything again, not while we have a say in it." Senate studied me for a long moment, and I watched something shift behind those wide, dark eyes. Cautious hope finally allowed to surface, after what must have been years of learning not to expect it. Oliver's team had the portable purification unit assembled and calibrated within 6 hours, working alongside Mirren engineers, who picked up the unfamiliar technology with a speed that impressed even him, and by the following morning, clean water was flowing back into the coastal settlements for the first time in weeks. It was not a battle. Nobody fired a weapon. Nobody made a speech. It was simply a problem that had gone unanswered for far too long, finally getting answered, because someone had finally decided that the size of a request did not determine whether it deserved a response. I stood on the edge of that settlement, as the sun set over an ocean I had never seen before, watching Mirren children splash in water that, 12 hours earlier, their parents had been rationing by the cup, and I thought about the chamber back home, about Trellick's contempt, and Ambassador Orun's careful diplomacy, and the strange, vast intelligence that had watched us long enough to decide we were worth noticing. None of them had built this moment. We had. Senate approached as the light faded, standing beside me in a silence that felt comfortable rather than uncertain. "Why did your council finally send someone?" she asked. "After 11 months of nothing." I considered how to answer that honestly, because I did not want to give her the kind of polished response Ambassador Orun might have offered in a formal address. "They did not send us," I said. "We came because we heard, and because we could, and because nobody should have to wait 11 months to matter to someone." Senate was quiet for a while after that, watching the children in the shallows, before she spoke again. "Perhaps that is a better reason than any the council could have given," she said. "Perhaps," I agreed. We stayed 3 more days on the Mirren homeworld, long enough to help their engineers fully integrate the new purification systems into their existing infrastructure, long enough for Grace to compile a full technical record that would let any future crew, human or otherwise, offer the same help without needing to start from nothing. When we finally departed, half the settlement had gathered along the water's edge to see us off, not with the formal ceremony the council loved so much, but with something quieter and, to my mind, far more valuable: the simple, unguarded gratitude of people who had learned, against every expectation built by years of disappointment, that someone had finally chosen to show up. Back on the bridge, as the reckoning pulled away from the Mirren system and set course for whatever request would come next, Daniel turned to me with the same question Oliver had asked days earlier, though he phrased it differently. "Do you think this is what it looks like now?" he asked. "Being taken seriously." I thought about the laughing chamber, about the vessel that had watched us before choosing to trust what it saw, about Senate's quiet disbelief that anyone had come at all, and I understood that the answer was more complicated than either triumph or vindication. "I think being taken seriously was never really the goal," I said. "I think the goal was always just this: showing up, doing the work, and letting the rest of the galaxy decide what it wants to make of that." Grace's console chimed with another incoming request, this one from a border colony none of us had ever heard of before, small, distant, and entirely unremarkable by council standards, exactly the kind of place that would have waited months or years for an answer that never came. I did not wait to read the details before giving the order. "Set a course," I said. "We have work to do." The reckoning turned once more, carrying a crew that had learned, in the space of a single season, what it truly meant to matter, in a galaxy that had spent decades insisting they never would, and somewhere far behind them, in a chamber that had once rung with laughter, an entire council was only beginning to understand exactly what they had almost let walk away.